Alright everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues, episode 57, Racist Graffiti in the Andersonville area, on several farms and barns up there. We're talking the West Glover area. The barn that was targeted, the farmers that actually own it, apparently they offered a $1,000 reward. They're like, well, we want to know who did this, prosecute him for vandalism. So we're offering $1,000 to anyone who can, cough up the person responsible. Then they upped it to $5,000 because they took crowdfunding. Now, is this not kind of similar to what happened in the 80s every time a cemetery was, had some pentagrams scrawled around and a gravestone kicked over? Every time that happened, the local community said, oh, there are devil worshippers among us, cult activity or something. Almost always, it never actually was. It was a bunch of drunken teenagers that thought they were having a good time. They were being edgy. It's like real-life shitposting or something. I'm going to put it out there and speculate that this is probably the same thing. The idea of like, oh, somebody drew a swastika in the men's room in one of the stalls or something, that's been happening for a very, very long time. It's fairly common. Go use some public restrooms sometime and see the sort of jokes that you see written on the side of the stalls. That doesn't mean that these people are actually members of the Ku Klux Klan or something like that. Generally speaking, here's the secret nobody wants to talk about. Generally speaking, people who are like their skins, Klan, whatever, they try to remain, they try not to be found out that they're members of these groups. They don't want to be harassed by people who would be averse to that in the local community. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense when they can go online and start a fucking blog and say whatever they want, basically. Or they can go and if they're just, having their jollies, they can, be anonymous unless they make a bunch of sock accounts to go spew, like, racist comments or something. Go to some CNN article, go on YouTube, go wherever they want. If they can do that, why would they take the trouble of trespassing on another person's property, vandalizing it in order for one or two people to see it? It doesn't make sense. The action would not make sense. It would make more sense to speculate. There would be a higher likelihood that this was some leftist who is just trying to rabble-rouse the local population into thinking that there was some prevalent issue with secret Nazis in the area. This has happened before in moral panics in times past. And it will inevitably at times happen now. Now, of course, for any given event, you're not necessarily certain that that's the case. It's also not certain that some Ku Klux Klan member decided to tip back one too many bottles of cheap moonshine and wander onto somebody's farm and abuse animals and scrawl graffiti around. We can't necessarily say that for sure, but don't you think that offering a $5,000 reward for something that you can scrub off in 5 minutes is slightly disproportionate? Doesn't that strike you as a little bit odd? Like, not quite normal? No offense to the farmers stuff. I mean, they were vandalized. But, who else actually saw it? You saw it. The police you called saw it. Ultimately, did anyone else in the community, were they even aware of this? No. Whoever actually did this, they got into the news. Local news, state news maybe, but they got into the news. They were attention seeking. They'll go around, and if they find out who's responsible at all, I'll make you a bet. I bet it's a couple of drunken teenagers. Some of the local mischief-making, teenage children. That'll be who's responsible. And they won't have any actual racialist beliefs whatsoever. They'll be like, oh yeah, we were drinking beer, underage probably. We got drunk and wandered onto some farms, and yeah, it was. We thought it was funny at the time. It was like a practical joke, and they'll find out. Probably half of these kids, they'll be like liking Hillary Clinton on Twitter or something like that. That's probably what will end up happening, and then of course the local community, because of it, will still be on edge for some time to come. Every time they see something slightly out of order, they'll assume it was some Nazi trying to play a prank on them. Like, oh, there's a banana peel on the sidewalk. It must be some Nazi left it here for a black person to fall on. That's basically the way that it happened in every other moral panic. Why wouldn't it happen that way now? And then there will be, again, there will be false flags, and we have seen them before as well. It's not a myth. Happened in the past. If you bring it up now, though, if you make the suggestion, I've noticed this, that there could ever be a possibility that the person crudely scrawling a swastika on the side of somebody's barn isn't actually a skinhead and is either just a drunken teenager or a leftist who's trying to stir up shit. If you make that suggestion, a lot of people say, no, 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 you're a conspiracy theorist. That's funny. It happened back in the moral panic of the 1980s all the fucking time. Some religious Christians mutilated one of their own animals to say, oh, there's devil worshippers. They did it for attention. Some old woman who's lonely and lives with 20 cats would do this. Or someone vandalizes the cemetery. It turns out it was the priest doing it or something like that to draw attention to an issue. And then that's always the excuse. Well, you know, it was real in my mind. I was trying to draw attention to the fact that there are Satanists everywhere. But the thing is, there were never actually any Satanists in the community. The one Satanist there was the model upstanding member of the community you'd never even know, because they don't say, hey, hi, can I shake your hand? I'm from the Church of Satan. Here to proselytize the Dark Lord to you peasants. It just didn't happen. I'll bet anything that this is going to become more prevalent. When people realize, when all the bored teenagers, when they realize that it can get them attention in the local community, they'll start doing stuff like that. Because that's what teenagers tend to do. It will happen. And every single time, people will assume that it's like some cell of the Ku Klux Klan that showed up at first to make their community miserable. Then when they find out it's a couple of the local kids, they're smoking pot, they're drinking some cheap, shitty beer, some piss beer, and they got wasted out in the cemetery and they decided to draw a swastika on some Jewish graves, they'll realize the truth, which is that, oh, yeah, it's kids being assholes, because kids are assholes sometimes. Just something that happens. Whatever's edgy and taboo, that's the iconography that's left behind in these graffiti incidences, will always be whatever's most offensive at the time. 1980s, it's the pentagram. The late 50s and 60s, maybe it's a peace sign or something like that. A hammer and sickle. There were kids back then that would like role play as communists just to piss people off. Of course, back then it was a little bit more of a challenge to pull that off, because if you got caught, you get sent to psychotherapy, get electroshock or something more a little bit worse than what they did in the 80s. In the 80s, it was like, oh, we're sending you to the troubled kids' home for the summer, and then it's like, oh yeah, praise Jesus, praise Jesus. They get bored. And there's still a problem child thereafter. Actually, now they just have a reason to be more bitter at the world. Now it's basically, now what they do is, oh, we're going to deplatform you online. We're going to make you scrub that fucking graffiti. It's like, come on. Some group of teenagers, probably. No, I'm willing to bet that it was. There's probably a couple of local kids. You watch, you wait and see. That'll probably be what happens. I'd be very surprised if it was actually some skinhead who did that. I'd be very, very surprised. You couldn't easily convince me that even somebody dumb enough to shave their hair off and get a bunch of swastika tattoos all over their body, and who sits there like they don't even care, they're smoking meth or whatever, even they have to have a little kernel of common sense left. Do you really think that they're willing to risk, actually being put in prison for vandalism and trespassing at the same time? In an aggravated sense, because the legal system, it increases charges if it's racially motivated. I'm not sure how they constitutionally get away with that, by the way, but they do. Are they really willing to risk that, unless, when they can go online and do the same thing? And by the way, if they are that dumb, wouldn't you think that they could use the I'm mentally disabled defense? Because clearly they would have to think it was a fucking good idea in the first place. I mean, it doesn't make sense. We've had cases before. Some group of kids, oh, haha, this will be a funny prank. And people in the community don't fucking find it funny. And they get in trouble. But ultimately, it's not part of a greater disease. It's just, it's normal youth rebellion of a sort. Yeah, you're going to see it more and more. As Generation Z progresses through its teens, there's going to be some hellioning going on. And a lot of people, they'll clutch their pearls, and all the Gen X and like older millennial parents, they'll be like, oh no, little Jimmy's turning into a frog-worshipping Nazi or something. No, they're not. That's just what they're doing, it to piss you off, and they're doing a good job. Sort of like when Generation X, when they smoked pot and all their yuppie parents started crying, oh, we need to do an intervention. And meanwhile, they're popping pills, they're guzzling their champagne, they're snorting coke in many cases, if they're in an urban setting especially. Oh, little Jimmy smoked pot. Oh no, Ronnie Reagan told us that that would make him a bad kid. Pretty soon he'll be a heroin junkie or something like that. Oh, little Jimmy's posting Pepe. Oh, it's pretty soon he's going to join the Klan. Oh no, he's going to ruin his life. No, he's not. 99.9% of the time they'll be just fine. They'll grow up, they'll mature, you know, whatever. Who fucking cares? Get over yourselves and your moralism, basically. That's about all. Peace out.